The sun hung mercilessly in the cloudless sky, a fiery orb that seemed to mock Clara Newsom as she stumbled across the scorching desert floor of eastern Colorado territory. Each step was agony, her once sturdy boots worn through, feet bloody and blistered, lips cracked from dehydration. 3 days without proper water had left her delirious, but stubbornness kept her moving toward the silhouette of mountains in the distance. She would reach Salida or die trying. It was June 1878, and Clara had nothing left but her determination. The stagecoach robbery had taken everything: her money, her supplies, and the lives of her traveling companions. By some miracle, she had survived, hiding in a crevice while bandits murdered the driver and the other passengers. When they'd finally departed, she'd emerged to find herself alone in the vast emptiness of the high desert, miles from civilization. She didn't see the horseman approaching until his shadow fell across her path. Clara lifted her head, squinting against the harsh sunlight, preparing herself for the worst: another bandit returning to finish what his compatriots had started. Instead, she saw a tall figure atop a chestnut stallion, his face obscured by the brim of his hat. "Madam," the stranger called, his voice deep and resonant, "you look to be in a bad way." Clara tried to respond, but her parched throat produced only a rasping sound. She swayed unsteadily, the world tilting at a strange angle. The rider dismounted in one fluid motion, reaching her just as her knees buckled. Strong arms caught her before she hit the ground. "Easy now," he said, supporting her weight effortlessly. "I've got you." Through the haze of exhaustion and dehydration, Clara registered a pair of intense gray eyes studying her with concern. The stranger lifted a canteen to her lips, and she drank greedily, water spilling down her chin and neck. "Not too fast," he cautioned, pulling the canteen away. "Small sips or you'll make yourself sick." Clara nodded weakly, allowing him to control how much water she consumed. When she'd had enough to speak, she rasped, "Thank you, Mr. Xavier Kane," he replied, his weathered face softening slightly. "Most folks just call me Zav." "Clara Newsom," she managed, wincing as pain shot through her feet. Zav glanced down at her bloodied footwear and frowned. "You've been walking a while." "Stagecoach robbery," Clara explained, her voice barely above a whisper. "3 days ago, everyone else." She couldn't finish the sentence. Understanding darkened Zav's expression. "You're heading to Salida?" Clara nodded. "My aunt lives there, only family I have left." Without another word, Zav lifted her into his arms as though she weighed nothing, despite her protests. "Miss Newsom, your feet are torn to pieces and Salida's still nearly 20 miles away," he stated matter-of-factly. "I reckon I can get you there before nightfall if we share my horse." Clara wanted to object, to insist she could walk, but the relief of being off her ravaged feet was overwhelming. "Why would you help a stranger?" she asked instead. Zav's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. "Out here, a person's goodwill is sometimes all that stands between life and death. Besides," he added, settling her onto his horse before mounting behind her, "my ma would haunt me till my dying day if I left a lady in distress." As they rode, Clara drifted in and out of consciousness, aware of the steady rhythm of the horse beneath them and the solid presence of the cowboy at her back. His arm around her waist kept her from falling, a secure anchor in her disorienting exhaustion. "Stay with me, Miss Newsom," Zav murmured whenever she started to slump. "Tell me about this aunt of yours." Clara forced her eyes open. "Aunt Josephine," she said, latching onto the conversation like a lifeline. "She owns the millinery shop in town. Wrote to me after my parents died of the fever back in St. Louis, said I could come work with her." "That's good," Zav encouraged. "Josephine Bell, I know the place, fine establishment." Clara nodded, surprised. "You know her." "Salida's not a big town, Miss Newsom. Most everyone knows everyone." He adjusted his grip, keeping her steady as they navigated a rough patch of terrain. "Your aunt makes the finest hats this side of Denver, made one for my sister's wedding last year." The sun inched across the sky as they continued their journey, Zav occasionally stopping to give Clara more water and to rest his horse. During one such stop, he carefully examined her feet, cleaning the worst of the wounds with water from his canteen and wrapping them in strips torn from his spare bandana. "These need proper tending," he told her, his touch gentle despite his calloused hands. "But this should help until we reach town." Clara watched him through half-lidded eyes. "Why were you out here?" she asked, curiosity finally breaking through her fatigue. "There's nothing for miles." Xav secured the makeshift bandages before answering. "I work for the Double R Ranch about 15 miles east of here. Was tracking some strays that wandered off during last week's thunderstorm." He helped her back onto the horse. "Lucky for you, I decided to check this western stretch." "Lucky indeed," Clara murmured, leaning against him once they were mounted again. As the afternoon wore on, Clara learned that Xavier Kane was a man of few words but considerable depth. He'd fought briefly in the closing months of the Civil War despite being barely old enough to enlist, had tried his hand at gold mining in the mountains before settling into ranch work, and had an uncanny ability to predict weather changes by the behavior of his horse. In turn, she told him about growing up in St. Louis, losing her parents to typhoid the previous winter, and her journey west to start anew. She didn't mention Thomas, the fiancé who had abandoned her when her family's modest fortune had been depleted by her father's medical expenses. Some wounds were still too raw. The sun was low in the sky when the first buildings of Salida came into view. Clara felt a surge of emotion, relief, gratitude, and an unexpected reluctance to part from the quiet cowboy who had saved her life. "Thank you," she said softly. "I wouldn't have survived without your help." Xav's arm tightened briefly around her waist. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Clara replied with certainty, "they wouldn't have." Aunt Josephine's millinery shop was on the main street, a tidy wooden structure with a colorful display of ladies' hats in the window. Despite the late hour, a lamp still burned inside, and when Xav knocked on the door, it opened almost immediately to reveal a slender woman in her early 50s. "We're closed for the Josephine," Bell began, then stopped abruptly when she recognized her visitor. "Mr. Kane, what brings you?" Her gaze fell on Clara and she gasped. "Good heavens, Clara, she was on foot in the desert," Xav explained, still supporting most of Clara's weight. "Stagecoach robbery, she needs a doctor and rest." Josephine's hand flew to her mouth. "Dear God, bring her in, quickly." The next few hours passed in a blur for Clara. Dr. Wilson was summoned to treat her feet and examine her for other injuries. Aunt Josephine fussed and clucked, preparing a bath and clean clothes while the doctor worked. Through it all, Xavier Kane remained a steady presence, answering the doctor's questions about where he'd found her and the condition she'd been in. Only when Clara was settled in the small bedroom above the shop, her feet properly bandaged and her thirst and hunger sated, did Xav prepare to take his leave. "Mr. Kane," Josephine said earnestly, clasping his hand between both of hers, "I don't know how to thank you properly." "No thanks needed, Mrs. Bell," he replied, uncomfortable with the gratitude. "Just did what needed doing. Nevertheless, you saved my niece's life. You must allow me to repay you somehow." Xav shook his head, knowing she's safe is payment enough. He glanced up the stairs toward Clara's room. "When she's feeling better, tell her." He paused, seeming to reconsider. "Just tell her I'm glad I found her in time." With that, he settled his hat on his head and departed, leaving Clara to drift into exhausted sleep, the memory of strong arms carrying her through the desert following her into her dreams. The next week passed slowly for Clara as she recovered under her aunt's watchful care. The local newspaper carried a story about the stagecoach robbery, confirming that a band of outlaws known as the Slater Gang was responsible. The bodies of the other passengers and the driver had been discovered and brought to town for burial. Clara attended the service, leaning heavily on a cane, paying her respects to the strangers who had shared her journey and her tragedy. She thought often of Xavier Kane, the taciturn cowboy who had carried her those final 20 miles to safety, but there was no sign of him in town. Aunt Josephine explained that the hands from the Double R rarely came into Salida except on paydays, preferring the rowdier atmosphere of the larger settlement of Poncha Springs when they sought entertainment. 2 weeks after her arrival, Clara was well enough to begin working in the shop. Her aunt taught her the basics of millinery, how to block and shape the felt, how to steam and mold the materials, how to add trimmings that would appeal to the ladies of Salida. Clara found she had a natural talent for the work and enjoyed the creative aspects of designing hats that flattered different face shapes. It was on a warm Tuesday afternoon in early July, while Aunt Josephine was at lunch with friends from her church group, that the bell above the shop door jingled. Clara looked up from the hat she was trimming with silk flowers to find Xavier Kane standing awkwardly in the entrance, hat in hand. "Mr. Kane," she exclaimed, setting aside her work and rising to greet him. "What a pleasant surprise." Xav shifted uncomfortably, turning his hat in his hands. "Miss Newsom, you're looking much improved." Clara smiled, suddenly aware of her plain work dress and the stray wisps of hair that had escaped her pins during her labors. "Thanks to you. Please come in properly. Can I offer you some tea or perhaps something cold? It's quite warm today." "No, thank you, madam. I can't stay long." Despite his words, he stepped further into the shop. "I just wanted to make sure you'd recovered." "Almost completely." Clara gestured to her feet, now properly shod in soft leather boots. "The doctor says I was fortunate. Another day out there." She let the sentence trail off, both of them understanding what would have happened. An awkward silence fell between them until Clara spoke again. "I never properly thanked you, Mr. Kane." "You did," he corrected. "And it's Xav, if you don't mind." "Xav," Clara repeated, liking the way the name felt. "Then you must call me Clara." She hesitated, then added, "I'm grateful every day that it was you who found me." Something flickered in his gray eyes, an emotion Clara couldn't quite identify. "I've been thinking about you," he admitted, the words coming reluctantly. "Wondering how you were faring." Clara felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the summer heat. "I've thought of you too," she confessed. "I'd begun to think I wouldn't see you again." Xav's expression softened. "Truth be told, I wasn't planning to come to town today, but we had business with the blacksmith and I volunteered." He glanced around the shop, seemingly at a loss for what to say next. "Your aunt's teaching you the trade, she is. I'm learning quickly." Clara moved toward a display of recently completed hats. "In fact, I finished my first piece entirely on my own yesterday." She lifted a handsome brown hat with a simple band and a small pheasant feather tucked into one side. "It's nothing fancy, but it's fine work," Xav interrupted, studying it with genuine interest. "Practical but with enough style to satisfy a man who cares about such things." Clara beamed at the compliment. "Thank you. I designed it with the working men of the area in mind." Their eyes met over the hat and something shifted in the air between them. Clara felt her heartbeat quicken as Xav held her gaze. The moment was broken by the shop bell as Aunt Josephine returned, her face brightening when she saw who was visiting. "Mr. Kane, how wonderful to see you again." "Have you been checking on my niece?" Xav nodded, stepping back from Clara with a touch of reluctance. "Yes, madam, glad to see she's recovered." "Thanks entirely to you," Josephine said warmly. "You must stay for supper this evening, I insist. It's the least we can do." Xav looked as though he might refuse, but when his eyes met Clara's hopeful gaze, he relented. "That's very kind of you, Mrs. Bell. I'd be honored." "Excellent. Clara, dear, close up the shop a bit early today and help me prepare. Mr. Kane, shall we expect you around 6? "Yes, madam," he agreed, settling his hat back on his head. "I'll just see to my business with the blacksmith and return then." After he'd gone, Aunt Josephine turned to Clara with a knowing smile. "A fine man, Mr. Kane, one of the most respected hands at the Double R, from what I hear." Clara busied herself with straightening merchandise to hide her flushed cheeks. "He saved my life. I'm merely grateful." "Of course, dear," Josephine replied, her tone suggesting she saw more than gratitude in her niece's expression. "Now let's decide what to serve our hero for supper, shall we?" The meal that evening was a pleasant affair, with Xav gradually relaxing in the warm atmosphere of the Bell home. He spoke more than Clara had heard during their journey, sharing stories of life on the ranch and listening attentively as Josephine recounted local gossip and Clara described her adjustment to life in Salida. When the meal concluded, Josephine tactfully excused herself to visit a neighbor, leaving Clara and Xav alone on the small porch that overlooked the garden behind the shop. "Your aunt is quite a character," Xav observed, leaning against the railing. "I can see where you get your strength." Clara smiled, wrapping a light shawl around her shoulders against the cooling evening air. "She's remarkable, taking me in sight unseen, teaching me her trade. I'm fortunate to have her." "And she's fortunate to have you," Xav replied. "Mrs. Bell has been alone too long since her husband passed." They fell into comfortable silence, watching as the first stars appeared in the deepening blue of the sky. Clara stole glances at her companion, admiring his profile, the strong jaw, the straight nose, the way his dark hair curled slightly at his collar. "Will you tell me something, Clara?" Xav asked suddenly. "If I can," she responded, curious. "What really brought you west? There's more than just an aunt's invitation, isn't there?" His perceptiveness surprised her. Clara hesitated, then decided on honesty. "After my parents died, I discovered my father had left considerable debts. Our house and possessions were sold to satisfy the creditors." She sighed, the memory still painful. "My fiancé decided a penniless bride wasn't to his liking and broke our engagement." Xav's expression darkened. "The man's a fool." The simple statement, delivered with such conviction, warmed Clara more than any elaborate sympathy could have. "Perhaps it was for the best," she acknowledged. "I've come to realize he loved the idea of me, the merchant's daughter with a decent dowry, more than he loved me." Still, it was humiliating. She straightened her shoulders. "When Aunt Josephine's letter arrived offering me a home and a chance to learn her trade, it seemed like providence. And then the stage was robbed," Xav said softly. Clara nodded. "I began to think I was cursed until you found me." She turned to face him fully. "You didn't just save my life that day, Xavier Kane. You restored my faith that good people still exist in this world." Xav looked uncomfortable with her praise. "I'm no saint, Clara, just a man who couldn't ride past someone in need." "That's precisely what makes you exceptional," she countered. Their eyes met and held, and Clara felt something shift between them, a connection forming that transcended their brief acquaintance. For a moment, she thought he might reach for her hand or perhaps even kiss her, but the sound of the front shop door opening broke the spell. "That will be Aunt Josephine returning," Clara said, stepping back slightly. Xav nodded, straightening from his relaxed posture. "I should take my leave." "It's a fair ride back to the ranch. Will you come to town again soon?" Clara asked, unable to keep the hope from her voice. A small smile curved his lips. "I reckon I might find reason to visit more regularly." He hesitated, then added, "There's a social at the church this Saturday evening. Would you consider attending with me, if it's not too forward to ask?" Clara's heart leaped. "I'd like that very much." The sound of Josephine's footsteps approaching the back door prompted Xav to make his goodbyes. As he left, tipping his hat to both women, Clara felt a sense of anticipation that she hadn't experienced since before her parents' deaths. For the first time in months, she found herself looking forward to what tomorrow might bring. The week passed slowly for Clara, each day filled with work in the shop and thoughts of the coming Saturday. When Aunt Josephine suggested they create a new dress for the occasion, Clara initially demurred, not wanting to seem too eager or to waste resources, but her aunt insisted. "You've had nothing but grief for months, my dear," Josephine said firmly. "Allow yourself this small pleasure. Besides," she added with a twinkle in her eye, "Mr. Kane should see what a lovely young woman he's escorting." Together they selected a pattern and fabric, a cornflower blue cotton that complemented Clara's eyes. They worked on it each evening after the shop closed, and by Saturday afternoon, the dress was finished, simple but elegant, with a modest bustle and delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. As she dressed for the social, Clara felt a nervous excitement she hadn't experienced since her first dance back in St. Louis. Aunt Josephine helped her arrange her hair, pinning the thick chestnut waves into a becoming style, with a few soft curls framing her face. "You look beautiful, my dear," her aunt said, stepping back to admire the effect. "Like your mother at your age." Her eyes grew misty. "She would be so proud of the woman you've become." Clara hugged her tightly. "Thank you for everything, Aunt Josephine. I don't know what I would have done without you." "Nonsense, your family." Josephine brushed away a tear. "Now let's not become maudlin. Your young man will be here any moment." Right on time, a knock sounded at the door. Xav stood on the threshold, looking somewhat transformed from the dusty cowboy who had rescued her. He wore a clean dark suit, his hair neatly trimmed, his face freshly shaved. Only his weathered hands and the tan line at his collar revealed his outdoor profession. "Miss Newsom," he greeted her, his eyes widening slightly as he took in her appearance. "You look." He seemed at a loss for words. Clara felt a blush creep up her cheeks. "Thank you, you look quite handsome yourself." Aunt Josephine shooed them out the door with instructions not to stay out too late, her expression indulgent as she watched them walk toward the church, where lanterns were already being lit for the evening's festivities. The social was a simple affair by city standards, but represented the height of Salada's social calendar. The church hall was decorated with wildflowers and ribbon streamers, and a small band played traditional tunes in one corner. Tables laden with food and punch lined the walls, while the center of the room was cleared for dancing. Clara was introduced to what felt like the entire town. The mayor and his wife, the doctor who had treated her feet, the blacksmith Xav had visited, numerous ranchers and merchants with their families. Everyone seemed curious about the newcomer and her connection to the typically solitary cowboy. "You've caused quite a stir," Clara remarked to Xav as they took a breather from the introductions. "I get the impression you don't normally attend these gatherings." Xav handed her a cup of punch. "Not for lack of invitation," he admitted, "just never saw much point in coming alone." The simple statement sent a flutter through Clara's chest. Before she could respond, the band struck up a lively reel and Xav offered his hand. "Would you care to dance, Miss Newsom?" he asked formally. Clara placed her hand in his. "I'd be delighted, Mr. Kane." To her surprise, Xav proved to be an accomplished dancer, guiding her confidently through the steps of the reel and the following waltz. His hand at her waist was respectful but sure, his movements more graceful than she would have expected from a man who spent his days on horseback. "You dance beautifully," Clara commented as they circled the floor. Another hidden talent, a ghost of a smile, touched his lips. "My mother insisted all her children learn, said it was a civilized skill even ranch folk should possess." "She sounds like a wise woman." "She was," Xav agreed, a shadow passing over his features. "Lost her 2 winters ago to pneumonia." Clara squeezed his hand gently. "I'm sorry, it's not easy losing parents," he nodded, acknowledging the shared understanding between them. "It changes you. Makes you realize life doesn't come with guarantees." As the evening progressed, they danced more, ate the simple but delicious food provided by the church ladies, and talked. Clara found herself drawn to Xav's quiet strength, his thoughtful observations, and the rare smiles that transformed his serious face. She learned that he had been working at the Double R for 5 years, that he had a small claim on a piece of land near the mountains that he hoped to build on someday, that he had a younger sister, married to a shopkeeper in Denver, and an older brother who had died at Shiloh. In turn, she told him about her childhood in St. Louis, her father's business importing goods from Europe, her mother's love of music and literature, and how she had once dreamed of traveling to Paris to see the fashions there firsthand. "Perhaps you will someday," Xav suggested as they walked back toward the millinery shop under a canopy of stars. The social having wound down near midnight, Clara shook her head. "Those dreams belonged to a different life. I'm content with what I have now." He studied her face in the moonlight. "Are you, truly?" The question caught her off guard with its perceptiveness. "I'm learning to be," she answered honestly. "After everything that happened, I'm grateful just to be alive, to have family, to have work I enjoy." She glanced up at him shyly. "To have met you." They had reached the shop door and Xav turned to face her fully. "Clara," he said, his voice low and serious, "I'd like to call on you properly, with your aunt's permission, of course." Clara's heart quickened. "I'd like that very much," she replied softly. For a long moment, they stood close in the silver moonlight. Then, slowly, Xav leaned down and brushed his lips against hers in a gentle kiss that was over almost before it began. Yet its effect lingered, leaving Clara's senses heightened, her pulse racing. "Good night, Clara Newsom," Xav murmured, stepping back. "Good night, Xavier Kane," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. He waited until she was safely inside before departing, and Clara watched from the window as he walked toward the livery stable where he had left his horse, his tall figure disappearing into the shadows of the quiet town. True to his word, Xav began calling on Clara regularly. Every Sunday after church, he would escort her and Aunt Josephine home, staying for the midday meal. Occasionally during the week, he would ride into town on ranch business and stop by the shop. Each visit deepened their connection, their conversations ranging from the practical matters of daily life to deeper discussions of hopes and beliefs. August brought a brutal heat wave that left the town dusty and irritable. Business at the millinery slowed, as ladies preferred to remain in the relative cool of their homes rather than venture out for new hats. Even Aunt Josephine's usually cheerful disposition was strained by the relentless temperature. "Perhaps we should close early today," she suggested one particularly stifling afternoon, fanning herself with a piece of cardboard. "No one will be shopping in this heat." Clara was about to agree when the shop door opened, admitting a blast of hot air and a tall figure in a dust-covered duster. "Xav," she exclaimed, surprised by his unexpected appearance. "We weren't expecting you today." He removed his hat, revealing sweat-dampened hair. "Didn't plan to come, but there's news you should hear." His expression was grim. "The Slater gang was spotted near Poncha Springs yesterday. Sheriff's organizing a posse." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. The nightmares about the stagecoach robbery had only recently begun to subside. "They're coming here, can't say for certain," Xav replied, accepting the glass of water Josephine hastily fetched. "But I wanted to warn you. The ranch hands have been asked to join the posse. I'll be riding out with them tonight." Fear gripped Clara's heart. "But that's dangerous. These men are killers. All the more reason to stop them before they hurt anyone else." Xav's jaw was set in a determined line. "Xavier's right," Josephine said, though her face showed her concern. "Those outlaws must be brought to justice." Clara knew they were correct, but the thought of Xav facing the same men who had murdered the stagecoach passengers filled her with dread. She recalled the cold efficiency with which they had executed the driver, the terror of hiding while they searched the surrounding area, the bodies she had discovered once they'd gone. "Please be careful," she whispered, unable to say more with her aunt present. Xav's expression softened. "I will." He hesitated, then asked, "Mrs. Bell, might I have a word with Clara?" "Privately," Josephine nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Of course, I'll just check our inventory in the back room. Take your time." Once they were alone, Xav moved closer to Clara, taking her hands in his. "I didn't want to leave without seeing you," he said quietly. "Without telling you?" "Telling me what?" Clara prompted when he faltered. His gray eyes held hers intently. "That I've come to care for you, Clara, more than I thought possible in such a short time." His calloused thumb traced gentle circles on her palm. "If something were to happen to me, don't," Clara interrupted, her voice catching. "Don't speak that way." "I have to," he insisted. "Life's uncertain, especially out here. If something happens, I want you to know that finding you in that desert was the best thing that ever happened to me." Tears welled in Clara's eyes. "And you were my salvation," she whispered. "Not just from death, but from despair. You've given me hope again, Xav." He drew her closer, one hand coming up to cradle her face. "When this is over, when the Slaters are brought to justice, there's something important I want to ask you." His gaze held a promise that made her heart race. "But it should wait until then." Clara understood what he wasn't saying. He wouldn't bind her with words or promises that fate might prevent him from fulfilling. It was both honorable and agonizing. "I'll be waiting," she said simply. This time, their kiss held nothing of the tentative gentleness of their first. It was a sealing of unspoken vows, a desperate affirmation of feelings too new and precious to lose. Clara clung to him, memorizing the feel of his arms around her, the scent of leather and clean sweat, the taste of his lips on hers. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, Xav pressed his forehead to hers. "Take care while I'm gone. Stay close to town." "I will," she promised. "Come back to me, Xavier Kane." "Nothing could keep me away," he vowed. With a final kiss, briefer but no less intense, he left, striding purposefully toward the sheriff's office where the posse was gathering. That night, Clara barely slept, her mind filled with terrifying scenarios of what might befall Xav and the other men pursuing the outlaws. The following days were an exercise in patience and faith, as she went through the motions of normal life while waiting anxiously for news. 3 days after the posse's departure, word reached Salida that they had engaged the Slater gang in a fierce gunfight near the Arkansas River. 2 of the outlaws had been killed, 1 wounded and captured, but the leader, Jack Slater himself, had escaped. 1 deputy had been shot but would recover. The rest of the posse was returning to town. Clara and Josephine joined other anxious wives, mothers, and sweethearts at the edge of town, watching for the dust cloud that would signal the men's approach. When they finally appeared on the horizon, Clara strained to identify Xav among the distant figures. "Do you see him?" Josephine asked, shielding her eyes against the sun. "Not yet," Clara replied, her hands twisted in her skirts. As the riders drew closer, she scanned each face frantically. Most were unfamiliar to her ranchers and townsmen she knew only in passing. Sheriff Briggs rode at the front, alongside the wounded deputy who was supported in his saddle by another man. Behind them came the captured outlaw, his hands bound, face bruised and sullen. And then, near the back of the group, she spotted him tall and straight in his saddle, dusty and tired, looking but wonderfully, blessedly alive. Clara's knees nearly buckled with relief. The posse was met with cheers and embraces as they entered town. Clara held back, waiting as Xav dismounted and handed his horse's reins to a stable boy. When he finally turned and saw her, the weariness in his face gave way to something brighter, more vital. He crossed the distance between them in long strides, heedless of the onlookers, and gathered her into his arms. "You're safe," Clara breathed against his chest, inhaling the now familiar scent of him beneath the dust and gunpowder. "Told you I'd come back," he murmured into her hair. They stood locked together until Aunt Josephine approached, her expression understanding but concerned. "People are starting to talk," she said quietly. "Perhaps we should continue this reunion at home." Aware suddenly of the curious glances directed their way, Clara stepped back reluctantly. "Yes, of course. Xav, you'll join us for supper," he nodded, his hand lingering on hers. "Just need to stable my horse and give my report to the sheriff. I'll be along shortly." That evening, over a meal of fried chicken and biscuits, Josephine had been cooking since the news of the posse's return reached them. Xav recounted the pursuit and capture of the outlaws. He downplayed his own role, but Sheriff Briggs, who stopped by to check on one of his deputies, revealed that Xav had been instrumental in tracking the gang and had personally captured the wounded man. "Mr. Kane's one of the finest trackers I've seen," Briggs told them, accepting a piece of Josephine's apple pie. "Followed signs the rest of us couldn't even spot, and cool as ice when the shooting started." Clara felt a mixture of pride and renewed fear at the thought of Xav in the midst of gunfire. "But Jack Slater escaped?" she asked, the sheriff's expression darkened. "Unfortunately, yes, slipped away during the confusion, but we'll get him eventually. He can't hide forever." After Briggs departed, the three of them sat on the porch, enjoying the cooler evening air. When Josephine tactfully excused herself to do the dishes, insisting she didn't need help, Xav turned to Clara with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I told you there was something I wanted to ask when this was over," he began. "But with Slater still out there, I'm not sure it's right to ask me," Clara interrupted, her heart pounding. "Whatever comes, we'll face it together." Xav took her hands in his expression more open and vulnerable than she had ever seen it. "Clara Newsom, I know we haven't known each other long by most standards, but out here life moves at a different pace. When you find something precious, you hold on to it." He took a deep breath. "I love you. I think I started falling for you that day in the desert, watching you fight to stay conscious, to stay alive. I've never met anyone with your courage, your kindness, your strength." Clara felt tears gathering. "I love you too," she whispered. "So much it frightens me sometimes." Xav squeezed her hands gently. "I don't have much to offer. The foreman's cabin at the Double R, my savings, the small claim I mentioned, but everything I have is yours if you'll have me." His voice dropped lower. "Will you marry me, Clara?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation, joy bubbling up through her tears. "Yes, Xavier Kane, I will marry you." His smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object, a simple gold band with a tiny pearl set in the center. "It was my mother's," he explained, sliding it onto her finger. "She made me promise to give it only to a woman worthy of it, someone with heart and spirit." Clara stared at the ring, overwhelmed by the significance of the gift. "I'll treasure it always," she promised, knowing he was giving her not just jewelry but a connection to the family he had lost. Xav lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her fingers just above where the ring now rested. "We should tell your aunt," he said. "Ask her blessing." "She'll give it gladly," Clara assured him. "She's been hinting about us since that first dinner." They found Josephine in the kitchen, humming as she dried the last of the dishes. She turned as they entered, her eyes immediately going to Clara's left hand and the ring that now adorned it. Her face broke into a wide smile. "Well, it's about time," she said, setting down her dish towel. "I was beginning to think I'd have to drop even more obvious hints." Xav chuckled, his arm around Clara's waist. We'd like your blessing, Mrs. Bell. You have it wholeheartedly, Josephine replied, embracing them both. Nothing would make me happier than to see Clara settled with a good man. She wiped at her eyes. Oh, how I wish your mother could see this day, Clara. I think perhaps she can, Clara said softly. And I think she would approve. As summer gave way to autumn, preparations for the wedding proceeded. Clara and Xav decided on a simple ceremony at the church in October, when the aspen trees would be aflame with gold and the weather still mild enough for an outdoor celebration afterward. Josephine insisted on creating Clara's wedding dress, a beautiful ivory creation with pearl buttons and delicate embroidery. When Clara protested the expense and labor, her aunt waved away her concerns. I've been saving silk for years, waiting for a special occasion, she explained. What could be more special than this? Besides, I never had a daughter to sew for. Let me do this for you. Clara relented, deeply touched by her aunt's generosity. Together they worked on the dress in the evenings, while during the day, Clara continued learning the millinery business and preparing for her new life. Xav rode into town as often as his duties at the ranch permitted. He had spoken with his employer, Mr. Russell, who had offered him continued employment along with the use of the foreman's cabin, a small but comfortable dwelling separated from the main bunkhouse. On his days off, Xav worked on his own claim, building a one-room cabin that he hoped would someday grow into a proper home. It won't be ready by the wedding, he told Clara apologetically during one of his visits. But maybe by spring we can move there, make it our own place. I don't care where we live, Clara assured him, as long as we're together. The town of Salida embraced the upcoming nuptials with enthusiasm. It wasn't often that a new romance bloomed so publicly among them, and the story of how they had met the city girl rescued from certain death in the desert by the taciturn cowboy had captured everyone's imagination. You'd think they'd never seen a wedding before, Clara remarked to Xav one Sunday after church, where they'd been approached by yet another well-wisher with advice and offers of help. It's not just any wedding, he replied, squeezing her hand. It's ours. As the wedding day approached, only one shadow darkened their happiness. Jack Slater remained at large, and rumors placed him in various locations throughout the territory. Xav tried to shield Clara from these reports, but she insisted on knowing the truth. I can't live in ignorance, she told him firmly. Not after what I survived. Reluctantly, Xav kept her informed of what news reached the ranch. 2 weeks before the wedding, word came that Slater had been spotted near Denver, heading north. The news brought relief that he seemed to be moving away from Salida, yet Clara couldn't shake the uneasiness that had settled over her since learning of his escape. The day before the wedding dawned clear and crisp, the aspens around Salida precisely the golden backdrop Clara had envisioned. The church ladies were decorating the sanctuary with autumn flowers and ribbons, and Josephine was putting the final touches on the wedding cake. Everything was ready. Clara spent the morning helping in the shop, which would be closed the next day for the celebration. Around noon, a group of ladies from the church arrived to whisk her away for a small gathering in her honor, a tradition for brides to be that included gifts, advice, and much good-natured teasing about married life. As the afternoon waned, Clara returned to the shop, her arms full of thoughtful presents from the women of Salida. She found Aunt Josephine in the back room, pinning the last bit of lace onto the wedding dress. Oh, it's perfect, Clara breathed, setting down her packages to touch the delicate fabric reverently. Just in time, too, Josephine said with satisfaction. Now you should rest. Tomorrow will be a busy day. Clara nodded, suddenly overcome with a mixture of excitement and nerves. I can hardly believe it's really happening, she admitted. After everything. Josephine patted her hand. Life has a way of surprising us when we least expect it, sometimes with hardship, sometimes with joy beyond measure. They were interrupted by a knock at the shop's front door. Josephine frowned. We're closed, I hung the sign. Perhaps it's Xav, Clara suggested, though she knew he was supposed to be at the ranch until morning when he would ride in with his best man, the ranch foreman. I'll see, Josephine said, moving toward the front of the shop. Clara heard the door open, followed by her aunt's polite but firm, I'm sorry, sir, but we're closed for a family occasion. The response chilled Clara's blood. Family occasion, is it? A rough male voice drawled. Well, now that sounds interesting. Step aside, old woman, I ain't here for no hat. Clara froze, her mind racing. That voice, she knew it. One of the men from the stagecoach. She had heard him giving orders, seen his silhouette against the desert sun as he checked the bodies of his victims, Jack Slater. Moving quietly to the doorway between the back room and the shop, Clara peered around the frame. A tall man with a scarred face stood just inside the entrance, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. Aunt Josephine stood rigidly between him and the back room, her face pale but determined. There's nothing of value here, she was saying. Just hats and sewing supplies. Slater's laugh was ugly. I ain't here for valuables neither. His eyes scanned the shop. I'm looking for someone, a girl who should have died in the desert but didn't. Word is she's in Salada now, getting hitched tomorrow to one of them cowboys that chased me into the hills. His hand tightened on his gun. Figure I owe them both for the trouble they caused me. Clara's heart pounded so loudly she was certain he would hear it. Aunt Josephine remained admirably composed. I don't know what you're talking about, she said firmly. Please leave my shop immediately. Slater took a menacing step forward. Don't play dumb with me. The whole town's talking about the wedding. Kane and the girl he rescued. Where is she? Clara knew she had to act. If she hid, he might hurt Josephine. If she revealed herself, at least her aunt might have a chance to escape, to get help. Taking a deep breath, she stepped into the shop. I'm Clara Newsom, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. The woman you're looking for. Slater's eyes narrowed as he studied her. Well, ain't this convenient? Thought I'd have to hunt all over town for you. Clara, no, Josephine protested. Run. Nobody's running nowhere, Slater growled, drawing his gun and pointing it at Josephine. Not unless they want a bullet in the back. What do you want? Clara asked, trying desperately to think of a way out of this nightmare. Slater's scarred face twisted in a cruel smile. Payback. You should have died out there with the rest of them. Instead, you got me shot, 2 of my men killed and 1 in jail waiting to hang. He gestured with the gun. But I'm a reasonable man. I'll settle for using you to get to Kane. He's the one I really want to see suffer. Clara's blood ran cold at the threat to Xav. He's not in town, she said quickly. He won't be back until tomorrow. Then we'll wait, Slater replied, his eyes glinting dangerously. Tie them up, he ordered, and Clara realized with horror that they weren't alone. Another man stepped out from behind a display case, rope in hand. Please, Josephine begged. Take whatever you want and go. The sheriff's busy with a disturbance at the saloon, Slater interrupted with a smirk. Convenient little brawl my friend here started before coming over. Now shut up and turn around. Clara's mind raced as the second outlaw roughly bound her hands behind her back. The shop had a back door that led to the garden. If she could somehow create a distraction, maybe Aunt Josephine could escape through it. You won't get away with this, she said, trying to keep Slater's attention on her. Everyone in town knows me. They'll realize something's wrong when we don't appear for supper at the hotel, Slater shrugged. By then, we'll be long gone, with you as insurance. He nodded to his accomplice. Gag them and get them to the horses. We're heading up to that old mining cabin. Kane will find us there once we send him the message. Clara realized with growing dread that this had been planned. Somehow, Slater had learned not just about her survival, but about her relationship with Xav, about the wedding, about the patterns of their lives in Salada. As the outlaw tied a cloth around her mouth, she caught Aunt Josephine's frightened eyes, trying to convey reassurance she didn't feel. They were marched out the back door where 2 horses waited in the alley. Clara was roughly lifted onto one, her hands still bound behind her. Josephine was placed behind Slater on the second horse. As they rode out of town, taking back roads to avoid being seen, Clara tried to memorize their route, desperate for any information that might help if a chance for escape presented itself. The journey took them into the foothills west of town, following a faint trail that grew steeper and rockier as they ascended. After about an hour, they reached an abandoned mining claim, a crude cabin with a collapsed shaft entrance nearby. The outlaws dismounted and pulled their captives from the horses. Inside, the cabin was dusty and cold, with only minimal furnishings: a rickety table, 2 chairs, and a stained mattress on the floor. Slater pushed Clara onto one of the chairs while his companion tied Josephine to the other. Once they were secured, Slater removed their gags. Now, he said, pulling out a sheet of paper and a stubby pencil, you're going to write a note to your cowboy, Miss Newsom. Tell him if he wants to see you alive again, he should come alone to this cabin at dawn." He smiled unpleasantly. "And make it convincing." Clara glared at him. "And if I refuse," Slater's hand shot out, grabbing Josephine by the hair and pressing a knife to her throat. "Then the old lady dies slow and I still get my message to Kane some other way. Stop." "I'll write it," Clara said quickly, her heart hammering. "Just don't hurt her." With her hands freed but a gun trained on Josephine, Clara wrote the note as instructed, her mind working frantically. She needed to include some hint, some clue that would warn Xav he was riding into a trap. But with Slater reading over her shoulder, any obvious message was impossible. Instead, she chose her words carefully, including phrases that sounded natural, but that Xav might question references to their first meeting that weren't quite accurate, details that didn't align with what he knew of her. It was a desperate gamble, but the only one available to her. When she finished, Slater snatched the paper and read it, his eyes narrowed in suspicion. "This better not have any tricks in it," he warned. "How could it?" Clara replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "You watched me write every word." Seemingly satisfied, Slater folded the note and handed it to his companion. "Take this to the ranch, make sure Kane gets it personally, and don't be seen." As the second outlaw departed, Clara exchanged a glance with her aunt. The same thought passed between them. With only Slater remaining, the odds had improved slightly. But he was still armed, dangerous, and utterly without conscience. The hours that followed were a test of endurance. Slater kept them tied to the chairs, offering neither food nor water. As night fell, the temperature in the cabin dropped sharply, and Clara found herself shivering uncontrollably. Across from her, Aunt Josephine looked pale and exhausted but maintained a dignified silence. "Your cowboy should have the note by now," Slater commented, warming his hands at a small fire he'd built in the crude hearth. "Wonder what he'll do, come charging in like a hero or send the sheriff instead," he chuckled. "Either way, I'm prepared. Why are you doing this?" Clara asked, partly to distract him, partly because she genuinely wanted to understand the mind of the man who had caused so much suffering. "You could have left the territory, started fresh somewhere else." Slater's face hardened. "Nobody crosses me in lives to tell about it. Your man and that posse took everything from me, my gang, my reputation. Nobody's going to work with Jack Slater now." He spat into the fire. "Before I leave these parts, I'm making sure Kane pays for that." "And then what?" Clara persisted. "More robbery, more murder." "Is that all your life amounts to?" His hand cracked across her face before she saw it coming, the force snapping her head to the side and bringing tears to her eyes. "Shut your mouth," he snarled. "You don't know nothing about me or my life. Leave her alone." Josephine cried, struggling against her bonds. Slater ignored her, returning to his place by the fire. Clara tasted blood where her lip had split, but took a grim satisfaction in having provoked him. His control wasn't as complete as he pretended. That could be useful. As midnight approached, Clara found herself drifting in and out of an uncomfortable doze, jerking awake whenever her head dropped too far forward. In one of these moments of wakefulness, she noticed something. Slater was drinking from a bottle he'd pulled from his saddlebag, taking long swigs as he stared into the dying fire. Hope flickered to life. If he drank enough, became careless enough. But the hope was short-lived. Despite the amount of liquor he consumed, Slater remained alert, his eyes constantly moving between his captives and the cabin door. When his partner returned around 2 in the morning, he was still functioning with dangerous efficiency. "Delivered the note," the second outlaw reported. "Woke up half the bunkhouse doing it, but Kane got it personally." "What did he do?" Slater demanded. "Read it twice. Looked like he'd seen a ghost. Then he started giving orders, sending one hand for the sheriff, another to fetch the girl's aunt." The man snickered. "Guess he hasn't figured out she's already here." "And is he coming alone?" The outlaw shrugged. "Said something about following instructions to the letter, but he was strapping on extra ammunition, so I reckon he's planning for trouble." Slater nodded, satisfied. "Good, get some sleep." "I'll keep watch till dawn." As the second man stretched out on the mattress, Clara's mind worked furiously. Xav had read her note. Had he noticed the discrepancies? Would he understand she was warning him? Or would he ride straight into Slater's ambush, driven by fear for her safety? The night stretched endlessly. Clara's muscles cramped painfully from hours in the chair, and thirst made her tongue stick to the roof of her mouth. Beside her, Aunt Josephine had finally succumbed to exhaustion, her head drooping forward in uncomfortable sleep. Outside, the first hint of gray appeared in the eastern sky. Dawn was approaching. Slater noticed too. He rose, stretching, and kicked his companion awake. "Time to get ready," he said, checking his gun. "Kane will be here soon." The outlaws positioned themselves on either side of the cabin door, guns drawn. Clara's heart pounded painfully against her ribs. Any moment now, Xav would ride into their trap, believing he was coming to rescue her, unless he had understood her message. The sound of hoofbeats made everyone freeze. A single horse approaching slowly. Slater grinned, a predatory expression that made Clara's blood run cold. "Right on time," he whispered. The hoofbeats stopped. Clara held her breath, straining to hear any sound that might indicate what was happening outside. A long moment passed in tense silence. Then, unexpectedly, a voice called out not Xav's but Sheriff Briggs's. "Jack Slater, this is Sheriff Briggs. The cabin is surrounded." "Come out with your hands up," Slater's face contorted with rage. "Surrounded like hell." He moved to the cabin's single window, peering cautiously through a crack in the shutters. What he saw made him curse viciously. "How many?" his partner demanded nervously. "At least 6 that I can see," Slater growled, "including the sheriff and that foreman from the Double R." His eyes narrowed suspiciously as he turned to Clara. "You warned him somehow in that note." Clara said nothing, but her expression must have confirmed his suspicion because he lunged at her, pressing his gun to her temple. "Tell them to back off," he shouted, "or I'll kill her right now." Outside, Briggs called again. "We know you have hostages, Slater." "Let them go and we'll guarantee you a fair trial," Slater laughed bitterly. "Fair trial? I'd hang before the week's out." He pressed the gun harder against Clara's head. "Get up," he ordered, cutting her bonds. "You're my ticket out of here." Using Clara as a shield, Slater moved toward the door, keeping his gun trained on her while his partner covered Josephine. "I'm coming out," he shouted. "And I've got the girl. Anyone tries anything, she dies first." The cabin door creaked open. Clutched against Slater's chest with his arm around her throat, Clara blinked in the brightening dawn light. Sheriff Briggs and several deputies crouched behind rocks and trees around the clearing, rifles aimed at the cabin. To the left, partially hidden by a large boulder, stood Xav, his face a mask of controlled fury. Their eyes met across the distance, and in that moment, Clara knew what she had to do. Slater was expecting submission, fear. He wasn't prepared for resistance. Drawing on strength she didn't know she possessed, Clara suddenly dropped her weight, simultaneously driving her elbow back into Slater's stomach with all her might. The unexpected move broke his hold just enough for her to twist away, throwing herself to the ground. The clearing erupted in gunfire. Clara pressed herself into the dirt, arms covering her head, the sound deafening around her. When it stopped, a terrible silence fell. "Clara," Xav's voice, raw with fear and hope, she lifted her head. Jack Slater lay motionless a few feet away, his eyes open but seeing nothing, multiple bullet wounds in his chest. His partner had attempted to flee back into the cabin but had fallen in the doorway, also fatally shot. "Clara." Xav called again, running toward her, heedless of the danger of stray bullets. She struggled to her knees, then to her feet, meeting him halfway across the clearing. His arms closed around her with desperate strength, lifting her off the ground entirely. "Thank God," he breathed against her hair. "When I got that note, I knew something was wrong. You said you'd been walking 2 days in the desert, but it was 3. You mentioned the wrong stage line." He pulled back to examine her face, his expression darkening when he saw her split lip and bruised cheek. "Did he hurt you, beyond this?" "No," Clara assured him. "Aunt Josephine is right here," came her aunt's voice as she emerged from the cabin supported by Sheriff Briggs, a bit worse for wear but intact. As the sun rose fully over the mountains, painting the scene in gold and rose, Clara found herself wrapped in a borrowed blanket, seated beside Xav on a fallen log while the sheriff's men dealt with the bodies of the outlaws. Aunt Josephine had been taken back to town by one of the deputies, but Clara had refused to leave until she'd told Xav everything that had happened. "How did you know to bring so many men?" she asked when she'd finished her account. "The note asked you to come alone." Xav's arm tightened around her shoulders, which told me immediately it was a trap. "The Clara I know would never ask me to risk my life foolishly." He smiled slightly. Besides, you left clues. Once I knew you were in danger, I went straight to the sheriff. But how did you find us? Clara persisted. This cabin is miles from anywhere. The double R hands know every inch of these hills, Zav explained. When Pete the fella who delivered the note mentioned seeing a rider heading for the old Mackenzie claim, I had a hunch that's where they'd taken you. Clara leaned against him, suddenly overwhelmed by exhaustion and delayed shock. I was so afraid, she admitted, not just for myself but for you, that you would come alone trying to save me. Zav pressed a gentle kiss to her temple. I would have if I'd had to. But I've learned a thing or two about not being too proud to accept help when needed. He lifted her chin, his gray eyes serious. I almost lost you, Clara, twice now. I'm not taking any more chances with your safety. Does this mean the wedding is postponed? Clara asked, suddenly remembering what day it was supposed to be. To her surprise, Zav shook his head. Not if you still want to go through with it. Half the town is already gathered at the church, waiting for news, once they hear you're safe. He smiled. Well, I reckon they'd be happy to proceed with the celebration. Clara stared at him in disbelief. But look at me, I'm a mess. My dress is back at the shop and I haven't slept all night, and Zav silenced her with a gentle finger to her lips. You're alive, that's all that matters to me. We can wait if you want, have the wedding another day, or we can get married just as we are today with everyone who cares about us there to witness it. His expression grew tender. After what we've just been through, I don't want to wait another day to make you my wife, but it's your decision. Clara looked down at herself, dirty, disheveled, still trembling slightly from the ordeal. Then she looked back at Zav, at the love and certainty in his eyes, and made her choice. Today, she said firmly, life's too uncertain to postpone happiness. The wedding that took place that afternoon in Salada's small church wasn't exactly what Clara had envisioned when they'd begun planning. Instead of the beautiful ivory dress Josephine had created, she wore a simple blue dress borrowed from the doctor's wife. Instead of an elaborate arrangement of autumn flowers, she carried a hastily gathered bouquet of wildflowers and aspen's leaves. And instead of the carefully planned reception, the celebration consisted of whatever food the townspeople managed to put together on short notice. But as Clara stood beside Zav, repeating her vows in a voice that grew stronger with each word, she knew that none of those details mattered. What mattered was the man beside her, the community that had embraced them both, and the future they would build together. After the ceremony, as they moved through the crowd accepting congratulations and well wishes, Sheriff Briggs approached them. Mr. and Mrs. Kane, he said formally, tipping his hat. Wanted to let you know before I make the general announcement. The last member of the Slater gang confessed to everything this morning. Case is closed, justice served. Thank you, Sheriff, Zav replied, his arm around Clara's waist. That's welcome news. As Briggs moved away to speak with other guests, Zav turned to Clara. How does it feel to be Mrs. Kane? He asked softly. Wonderful, she replied honestly, though I'm still not sure how I went from walking through the desert with blistered feet to being a married woman in just 2 months. Zav's smile was both tender and amused. Life has a way of changing suddenly out here. You have to be ready to grab happiness when it presents itself. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. I'm just grateful I was the one who found you that day. So am I, Clara whispered, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. So am I. Epilogue 5 years later, Clara Kane stood on the porch of their ranch house, watching as Xavier guided their 3-year-old son, Joseph, on his first pony ride around the corral. The little boy's delighted squeals carried on the clear autumn air, making her smile. Behind her in the cradle, 2-month-old Elizabeth slept peacefully, her tiny face the image of her father's. The ranch had prospered in the 5 years since their marriage. What had begun as a small claim with a 1-room cabin had grown into a respectable operation, with a comfortable home, a small herd of cattle, and enough income that Clara could continue her millinery work for pleasure rather than necessity. Aunt Josephine still ran her shop in town, though she had taken on an apprentice to help with the day-to-day operations. She spent every Sunday with them at the ranch, doting on her grandniece and grandnephew as though they were her own grandchildren. Salada itself had grown as well, the railroad's arrival 2 years earlier bringing new prosperity and settlers. The town that had once seemed so foreign to Clara now felt like the only home she could imagine wanting. Zev completed the circuit of the corral and guided the pony toward the house, Joseph proudly sitting as tall as his little frame allowed. "Mama, did you see?" the boy called excitedly. "I rode all by myself, I saw, sweetheart," Clara called back. "You're a natural horseman, just like your father." Zav lifted Joseph from the saddle, setting him gently on the ground. "Go wash up for supper, son. Tell Aunt Josephine we'll be in shortly." As the boy scampered inside, Zav secured the pony to the hitching post and climbed the porch steps to join Clara. His face, more weathered now than when they'd met but no less handsome, softened as he looked at her. "Happy?" he asked simply, drawing her into his arms. Clara leaned into his embrace, savoring the familiar strength and warmth of him. "Completely," she answered. "You, more than I ever thought possible." He glanced toward the cradle where their daughter slept, then back at his wife. "Sometimes I still can't believe how lucky I am that I decided to check that western stretch of desert that day, that I found you in time." Clara reached up to touch his face, tracing the line of his jaw with gentle fingers. "Not luck," she corrected. "Providence." Zav smiled, capturing her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "Either way, I'm grateful every day." From inside the house came the clatter of supper preparations and Joseph's excited chatter as he helped his great-aunt set the table. The baby stirred in her cradle, making soft, cooing sounds as she woke. And in the corral beyond, the horses that were the backbone of their livelihood grazed peacefully in the golden light of late afternoon. "We should go in," Clara said, making no move to step out of Zav's embrace. "Aunt Josephine will have supper ready." "In a minute," Zav murmured, bending to kiss her with the same tenderness that still made her heart race after 5 years of marriage. "I'm not quite ready to share you yet." As the sun began its descent behind the mountains that had been the backdrop to their love story, Clara and Xavier Kane stood together on the porch of the home they had built. Surrounded by the life they had created from the most unlikely of beginnings, a desperate journey through the desert, blistered feet, and the cowboy who had carried her the last 20 miles to safety and to love.